probably all heard about medical racism, where people of color get worse health care because of their race, and that's usually due to human bias. So it's important that doctors rely less on their feelings and more on the numbers. Except, did you know that numbers can be racist too? I'll tell you more in a segment called How Did We Get Here? Tonight we're gonna talk about medicine. And just a little tip, laughter is not the best one. If you don't believe me, find someone with a peanut allergy, give them a Reese's cup, and then tell them a knock-knock joke. Knock, knock, they're dead. Now, specifically, we're gonna talk about a practice in medicine called race correction. That's when medical calculations are adjusted based on a patient's race. And race correction can result in disastrous outcomes for people of color. Now, these adjustments affect just about every part of the body. But since we're still in a giant respiratory pandemic, let's start by talking about the lungs. I think of them as the Tia and Tamara of the human body, because there are two of them and they are very close to my heart. For more than a century, doctors have assumed that black people have a smaller lung capacity than white people. Why? Well, to understand, we're gonna have to go all the way back to 1851 to meet a man named Samuel Cartwright. Now, I'm gonna warn you, you're gonna be really mad at this guy, but you can never hate him as much as his own barber obviously did. Now, Cartwright was a white doctor who decided he was going to investigate, quote, the diseases and physical peculiarities of the Negro race, which is already a red flag right there. It's like when you go on a first date and the guy tells you all his exes are crazy. Chan, the only thing all those girls have in common is you. Now, lo and behold, Dr. Cartwright discovered a bunch of what he called Negro diseases. For example, he insisted he found one called drapetomania that was rampant in the black population. He said that this horrifying disease, and I swear I'm not making it up, induces the Negro to run away from service. That's right. This white man thought that enslaved people were running away because of a medical disease and not, and I'm just spitballing here, because they're enslaved. That's basically like saying, I've discovered a disease that makes a waitress spit in my food every time I grab her ass. I call it dinermania. Also, Cartwright discovered another disease that I'm not even gonna try to pronounce because he made it up, so why should I bother? Cartwright claimed that this disease made enslaved people lazy. That's right. The enslaved people were lazy, not the white people enjoying a mint julep while they did all the work. And the main symptom of this disease, lesions on the enslaved people's backs. Now, I wonder how they got there. And this will probably come as no surprise. Cartwright said the best treatment for his made-up disease was more whipping. That's the worst medical prescription since, well, laughter. So what does all of this have to do with the lung capacity we were talking about earlier? Okay, well, on top of everything else, Cartwright was also the first doctor to measure lung capacity between black and white people. He used something called a spirometer, which looks like a very scientific bong. And he concluded that black people have a lower lung capacity than white people. Now, my instinct would be not to believe anything this reverse Eddie Munster said. But the medical profession went a different way because to this day, spirometers use a race-based correction that assumes that a 10 to 15% smaller lung capacity for black patients. But the actual science on that is very unclear. Race is connected to things like access to healthcare or likelihood of living in polluted areas, things that people of color are more likely to experience. So while there's no evidence that race determines lung health, there is plenty of evidence that racism could. And those are the kinds of things an algorithm does not pick up. Besides, anyone who wants to say that black people have weak lungs should be required to listen to Whitney Houston do this. She tricked us into loving America.
Yeah.
That woman has the lung capacity of 1,000 women and one hot air balloon. Now, Why does all this talk of lung capacity matter? Well, because if you think someone has diminished lung capacity, then you're not as worried when they get a respiratory infection and their numbers are lower. You might take longer to get the medical care, which could lead to more serious illness. And all those small decisions add up. For example, according to the CDC, Black people are currently hospitalized for COVID at a rate 2.5 times that of white people. So the numbers matter. And it's not just the lungs that are affected by these algorithms, because the racism creeps through all the rest of the body as well. For example, Black women have the highest rates of C-section, at least partially because of something called a VBAC score. The VBAC score is an algorithm that estimates the chance a woman has of a successful vaginal birth after she's had a C-section. Think of it like an SAT for your VAG. The VBAC score is important because C-sections are much riskier than vaginal births. And up until just a couple months ago, the VBAC actually automatically said that Black and Latinx women had a higher risk score than white women. That means more women of color were advised to get a C-section, which can be dangerous. But recently, researchers looked into why that was included in the algorithm at all. And like Marjorie Taylor Greene says to herself every morning when she looks in the mirror, get ready for some racism. Because they realized the algorithm was based on an old study that found that being unmarried and not having insurance actually increased the risk. It wasn't race at all, but someone saw single parent and lack of healthcare access and programmed that into their little algorithm as Black and Latinx, which is so devastatingly racist, I'd like to find whoever wrote it and give them this haircut. But guess what? It gets worse because the American Heart Association has something called a heart failure risk score. That's the score doctors use to predict the risk of death in patients who have been admitted to the hospital. The higher the score, the greater your risk. It's a single number that can change your life. Think of it like the Powerball, except the prize is getting admitted to the hospital. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, the heart failure risk score automatically assigns 3 additional points to any patient identified as non-Black. So basically, think of those points like jokes on an episode of Prairie Home Companion. You're gonna get a whole lot more of them if you're white. Now, what this means for parents is that the algorithm automatically categorizes all Black patients as lower risk, whether they are or not. And that has dangerous results. A 2019 study found that Black and Latinx patients with heart failure were less likely than white patients to be admitted to the cardiology service. That's heartbreaking, literally, and the list goes on. A race-adjusted algorithm makes Black Americans' kidney function look better, even though they have higher rates of end-stage kidney disease. A different algorithm used by hospitals to decide which patients get follow-up care let healthier white patients into the programs ahead of Black patients who were sicker. And the examples are endless, but my point is, hospitals treat people, not numbers. Patients of color deserve to go to the doctor and receive health care without bias, and for doctors to take into account their individual circumstances instead of their race. But until then, every single person who makes one of these racist algorithms should have to get the cart right. This has been How Did We Get Here?